They didn't just give away a house, they handed over my childhood, my silence, my place in this family like I'd never existed. One text from my sister shattered everything I thought I'd buried. The Whitmore house is officially mine. Just like that, it was hers. Signed over for $1. No warning, no conversation. Just a grinning photo of her in front of the only place that ever felt like it might have been mine. I spent my whole life doing the right thing, believing it would one day matter. Now I know better, and this time I won't be silent. The city lights of Boston flickered through the high-rise windows, casting a soft, sterile glow across the sleek apartment. Claire Whitmore, 38, sat at her glass desk, eyes narrowed as she scanned a legal brief. A stack of documents lay perfectly aligned beside her, untouched glass of wine nearby. The space was immaculate, every corner curated for efficiency, white marble countertops, chrome fixtures, cold light, not a single photograph adorned the walls, no family portraits, no childhood memories, just silence and order. Her phone buzzed, she didn't look up. "Still at it?" her assistant's voice chirped through the speaker. "Claire, it's Saturday night. You do know what weekends are, right? Normal people go out, or sleep, or I don't know, blink once in a while." Claire smirked faintly, unconvinced. "Let me know when normal people start winning federal cases." She hung up and returned to her documents. The ticking of the wall clock was the only sound in the room. She paused, rubbing her temples, the exhaustion just beneath her polished exterior starting to creep in. Then, on instinct, she checked her phone. Emails, court updates, nothing out of the ordinary, until she saw it. A message from her sister. "Just wanted to share the good news. The Whitmore house is officially mine." Attached was a photo. Brielle, radiant and smug, standing in front of the family estate. The Whitmore house, arms outstretched like she had just conquered a kingdom. Claire froze. Her pulse slowed, her fingers numb around the phone. The Whitmore house, their grandfather's home, the place where she had spent every summer pretending not to care that she was never truly wanted there. A property promised, at least she had believed, to both sisters equally, taken, given away, without her knowledge. She stood slowly, phone still in hand, staring at the message like it might morph into something else. Something that didn't make her feel like a child abandoned on a roadside. Her legs carried her to the kitchen on autopilot. She poured the wine, finally, sipped. Still tasteless, still cold. She set the glass down with more force than necessary. Then she reached for her phone and dialed. 1 ring, 2, voicemail. She hung up. Called again, nothing. The image of Brielle smiling in front of her childhood home was seared into her mind. The insult stung worse than betrayal. It was erasure. She sat back down on the edge of her couch, her posture unraveling. Her mind wandered backward. 12 years old, her birthday. Brielle squealing with joy as their father wheeled out a brand new pink bike with a shiny silver bow. Claire, quiet, clutched a thick book, Legal Fundamentals for Youth, a gift from her mother who had patted her shoulder and said, "You're Claire. You don't need help. You're strong. You'll always land on your feet." Strong, sure. Resilient, maybe, but this wasn't resilience. This was silence mistaken for consent. This was being edited out of her own family's legacy. She stood again and walked to the window. Downtown Boston glowed with the energy of a city that never paused, and yet she had been paused, frozen in place by a single text. Her eyes narrowed. She crossed the room, opened her laptop, and pulled up the county land records. A few clicks, a few keystrokes. Then, seller, Evelyn Whitmore, Charles Whitmore. Buyer, Brielle Whitmore. Transaction value, $1. Property, 18 Windmere Lane, the Whitmore house. Her jaw clenched. $1. One. They had signed it over like it was some hand-me-down piece of furniture. Not a home, not a legacy, not a monument built by Edgar Whitmore, a man who had believed in fairness and structure, a man who had taken her seriously when no one else did. She sat back, breathing deeply through her nose. She stared at the numbers on the screen, and then, like a switch flipping, the numbness drained away, replaced by a hot, focused rage. This wasn't about money. It never had been. It was about the principle, the pattern, the quiet dismissal she'd accepted her entire life. The decisions made in back rooms, whispered conversations where she was never invited, never considered. Not this time. She picked up her phone and scrolled to the contact, Lancaster and Associates, her grandfather's legal team, people who would know the truth, the real terms of the estate. She pressed call. A calm voice answered. Lancaster and Associates, this is Judith speaking. Claire's tone was clipped. I need to schedule an urgent meeting with Harold Lancaster. It concerns the Whitmore Trust and the unlawful transfer of property. There was a beat of silence, then, of course. Mr. Lancaster will be available Monday morning. Claire hung up. She walked to her desk, pulled open a drawer, and retrieved a slim leather journal she hadn't opened in years. She flipped to the first blank page and wrote in clean, deliberate strokes, "They erased me, but I'm still here, and this time I won't be silent." The next morning, the air in Boston felt heavier, as if the city itself understood the shift taking place. Claire stood outside a brownstone building nestled between two modern glass towers downtown. The carved stone above the door read Lancaster and Associates, weathered but dignified, just like the man who waited inside. This firm had handled the Whitmore family affairs for over 3 generations. Her grandfather, Edgar Whitmore, had trusted no one else with his legacy. Claire pushed through the heavy oak doors. The scent of old leather, wood polish, and ink welcomed her like a memory she hadn't realized she still carried. Books lined every wall in dark walnut shelves, their spines cracked and golden lettered. Framed black and white photos captured moments of courtroom drama and prestigious awards. Everything about the place whispered of tradition, of rules, of order, things her family had once claimed to value. A receptionist nodded and gestured toward the hallway. "Mr. Lancaster is expecting you." Claire walked down the hallway, her heels echoing softly against the wood floors. Harold Lancaster stood when she entered, a thin man in his early 60s, his face lined but alert, with an air of sharpness that hadn't dulled with time. He wore a charcoal 3-piece suit and reading glasses perched low on his nose. Behind him, a painting of Edgar Whitmore looked down solemnly. "Claire," Harold greeted, his voice low and deliberate. "It's been a long time." She sat across from him, folding her hands tightly in her lap. "Not long enough, apparently." Harold studied her for a moment before nodding slowly. He reached into the top drawer of his desk, then stood and walked to a locked cabinet on the far wall. With a brass key, he opened the safe and removed a red leather folder marked Whitmore Trust Original. "You said this was urgent," he began, returning to his seat. "I assume this is about the recent transfer of the Whitmore house?" Claire nodded. "They sold it to Brielle for $1. Harold opened the folder and pulled out several sheets, flipping past the standard clauses until he landed on a page marked in bold, Restrictions on Real Estate Transfer. He tapped the page with one finger. "Your grandfather was very specific about this property. It was his legacy, his pride. He ensured that the house could never be transferred to just one beneficiary unless both heirs gave written consent." Claire leaned forward. "I never signed anything, never saw a single document. They did this behind my back." Harold looked her in the eye, steady and grim. "Then the transaction is invalid. Legally, it doesn't hold." Claire exhaled a slow, measured breath. There it was, confirmation. She wasn't overreacting. She wasn't being dramatic. She had been deliberately erased. Harold continued, cautious. "But I need you to understand something. Contesting this, it will cause damage. A legal challenge against your own parents and sister, it will fracture your family beyond repair." She met his gaze without blinking. "They already did the damage, Harold. I'm just picking up what's left." He paused, then nodded once, the smallest gesture of respect. "Very well. If you want to pursue this, we'll need to act quickly. The longer the title sits with Brielle uncontested, the more complicated it becomes to reverse." Claire stood, her spine straight. "Then let's not waste time." Back in her apartment that night, she moved with purpose. She pulled open the bottom drawer of a steel cabinet and retrieved a file she hadn't touched in years. Old copies of correspondence between her grandfather and Lancaster's office, notes from family meetings, a printed email from Edgar reminding both granddaughters that legacy must be shared, not stolen. She laid it all out across her kitchen table like a general mapping a battlefield. Her apartment, once a quiet sanctuary, now felt like a war room. She opened her leather journal, the same one she'd written in the night before. She flipped past the page where she'd scrawled, "They erased me, but I'm still here." She turned the page and wrote again. "This time, I won't be silent." The words glared up at her like a vow. Her phone buzzed, a text from her mother. "Claire, don't make a big deal out of this. Let it go. The house was never really yours." Claire didn't respond. She didn't rage or cry. Instead, she opened her contacts and called a name she hadn't dialed in years. James Connors, a former colleague from her early law days. Sharp, relentless, exactly what she needed. He picked up after the second ring. "Claire Whitmore, wow, been a while." "I need help," she said without hesitation. "Family trust dispute, high profile, sensitive, but I'm going all the way." There was a pause. Then James replied, voice shifting to that familiar, razor-edge tone she remembered. "When do we start?" Claire looked out at the skyline, the city glowing gold and steel against the night. Now, the late afternoon sun spilled gold across the coastline of Cape Elizabeth, casting long shadows from the gabled roof of the Whitmore house. It looked like something off a postcard, grand, pristine, perfectly curated. But to Claire, it felt like a stage dressed up for someone else's play. As her car pulled into the gravel driveway, she could already see the changes. The old swing that once creaked under her childhood weight was gone. The porch railings were freshly painted. Even the hydrangeas, her grandfather's favorite, had been uprooted, replaced by minimalist white pebbles and polished black planters. She parked slowly, her hands still on the wheel as she took in the view. It had been years since she'd stood in front of the house. Years since she let herself feel anything about it, and now it belonged to someone else. Legally questionable, emotionally unforgivable. She stepped out, heels crunching against gravel, her presence disrupting the curated serenity. In the front yard, Brielle twirled with her phone in hand, perfectly framed against the house, posing for what looked like the 100th shot of the day. Claire caught the phrase echoing in her voice as she recorded a video. "New home vibes, you guys. Manifestation is real." Brielle froze mid-spin when she noticed Claire. Her sunglasses slid down just slightly as she squinted. "Oh, Claire, didn't expect you to show up so soon." She gestured vaguely toward the house. "Well, gorgeous, right? I've already swapped out those hideous old curtains. And the lighting inside? Total transformation." Claire didn't answer. She walked past her sister without a word and climbed the porch steps. The door was unlocked. Of course it was. Inside, the air smelled of fresh paint and artificial lavender. The walls that once displayed sepia-toned family portraits were now covered in oversized abstract canvases. Claire's shoes clicked against hardwood floors as she made her way into what used to be the study, her grandfather's sanctuary. It had been gutted and replaced with sleek workout equipment, yoga mats, and a floor-to-ceiling mirror. The scent of cedar, of pipe tobacco, of legacy, gone. All of it replaced by cold sterility and curated aesthetics. She moved through the house slowly, silently, like walking through a mausoleum. Each room stripped of memory, each corner unfamiliar, like her own history had been sanded down and painted over. Brielle followed, arms crossed, her tone flipping between defensive and dismissive. "I mean, let's be honest, this place needed an update. Grandpa's stuff was charming, sure, but it was ancient. This is 2020s, Claire. Fresh energy." Claire turned, her voice low but unwavering. "You erased everything that mattered," Brielle scoffed. "You live in Boston. You've got your fancy job, your high-rise apartment. You don't even need this place. I do. I'm starting over. This house gives me that." "This isn't about need," Claire replied. "It's about respect. About legacy, about being treated like I was part of this family instead of an afterthought." Brielle rolled her eyes. "God, you're always so dramatic, always the martyr, the overachieving, tightly wound sister who thinks she's above emotion but holds on to everything. Maybe if you weren't so cold, Mom and Dad would have looped you in." Claire's mouth tightened. They didn't loop me in because they didn't care if I had a say. They counted on me staying quiet, like I always have. A silence settled between them, thick and uneasy. Then, Brielle tilted her head and smiled condescendingly. You know, it's honestly kind of sad. All these years and you still think someone owes you something. Claire reached into her bag and pulled out a folded document, worn from handling. She unfolded it carefully and held it up, the red ink unmistakable across the bottom margin. She stepped closer, her voice flat and final. This is a copy of Grandpa's trust. You might want to read the part I've highlighted. Her finger tapped the text. The Whitmore house shall not be transferred to any single beneficiary without the signed consent of both legal heirs. Brielle blinked. What are you talking about? Claire leaned in, voice like steel wrapped in silk. I never signed anything. Which means this sale, it's illegal. And you? You're squatting. Brielle's face paled, the veneer of confidence cracking. You wouldn't. I already have, Claire said. Check the deed. She turned and walked out, heels echoing through the house like gavel strikes in an empty courtroom. She didn't look back, not even when the screen door slammed shut behind her. Brielle stood frozen in the center of the hallway, holding the paper like it had burned her fingers. Outside, the sun had dipped lower, casting a sharp silhouette of the Whitmore house against the horizon. Claire walked to her car, her breath steady, her path clear for the first time in years. This wasn't just about a house anymore. This was about memory, about justice, about no longer asking for a place at the table, but reclaiming it. The days leading up to the hearing were a blur of legal documents, case law, and sleepless nights. Claire buried herself in work, every page she turned a shield, every statute a weapon, her apartment transformed into a makeshift war room. Documents spread across every surface, post-it notes stuck to her fridge, highlighters bled dry on the counter. James Connors, her sharp-witted former colleague turned co-counsel, worked beside her like they'd never missed a beat. They combed through every file, every email, every scrap of legal paper her parents had hoped would disappear unnoticed. Claire cross-referenced signatures, found discrepancies in the timing of the deed transfer, and uncovered suspicious wire transfers from her parents' accounts to Brielle's LLC. I want everything airtight, she said, staring down at the trust document that started it all. If I'm going to bring my family to court, I'm not giving them a single inch of ground to stand on. And she didn't. When the day arrived, the Cumberland County Courthouse stood tall and solemn against a gray Maine sky. It was an old building with white columns and a long, cracked stone walkway. The kind of place where families came for divorce, custody, inheritance wars, where personal lives were aired like laundry on a public line. Outside, a small crowd of local reporters gathered. The headline had already hit that morning: Whitmore family at war over historic estate. Claire barely glanced at them as she stepped from her car, dressed in a tailored navy suit, her hair pulled back, eyes hard as flint. The Whitmores arrived in their usual style, a black SUV, windows tinted, polished like a limousine. Brielle stepped out first, wearing designer sunglasses and a trench coat that screamed performative elegance. Evelyn and Charles trailed behind, their body language stiff, like they were preparing for a family photo they didn't want to be in. Claire met no one's gaze as she walked into the courthouse. Inside, the hearing room buzzed with quiet tension. The judge, a stern woman named Justice Penrose, sat high on the bench, presiding like a watchful hawk. Claire's team took their side. Across the aisle, Brielle and her parents huddled with their attorney, visibly uneasy. The opening arguments set the tone. Brielle's lawyer spoke first, trying to frame the transfer as a heartfelt family decision. Miss Brielle Whitmore was entrusted with the care of the estate due to her proximity and availability. Miss Claire Whitmore resides out of state, has a demanding career, and has shown limited engagement with the property in recent years. The transaction was intended to protect the house and honor the family legacy. Claire's voice cut through the room as she rose from her seat. Protect the house? She repeated. Or erase the people who built it? She approached the bench, the copy of the trust in hand. This document, Your Honor, was created by Edgar Whitmore with the intention of preventing exactly this kind of unilateral decision. As per Section 4, Subclause B, the property cannot be transferred to a sole beneficiary without the joint consent of both legal heirs. I never signed. I was never informed, and this sale was conducted without legal authority. She paused, then added, legacy isn't preserved by deception. Justice Penrose studied the papers, lips pressed into a line. The room fell into silence, tension sharp enough to snap. Testimonies followed, expert witnesses, financial analysts, even Harold Lancaster himself, who confirmed the legal binding nature of the trust. Brielle squirmed during cross-examination, faltering when asked about the timing of her LLC and her knowledge of the legal clause she had conveniently overlooked. Hours passed like minutes, every moment a grind of truth against ego. Then the verdict came. Justice Penrose's voice rang clear, precise, final. The court finds that the transfer of the Whitmore house was conducted in violation of the stipulations set forth in the Whitmore Trust. The transaction is hereby declared invalid. The property shall revert to shared ownership under the original terms of the trust. All financial actions related to the sale must be reversed. A silence swept the courtroom. Evelyn slumped back in her chair, stunned. Charles looked away, his jaw tight, hands clenched in his lap. Brielle let out a quiet sob, biting her lip to keep more from spilling. Claire stood motionless, her expression unreadable, no smile, no victory speech, just a faint nod, measured, controlled, resolute. Outside, the reporters swarmed. Miss Whitmore, how do you feel about today's ruling? Do you plan to move back into the house? Was this about the property or something more personal? Claire didn't speak. She simply walked down the courthouse steps, her heels steady, her jaw set. The questions faded into background noise. Inside her head, her grandfather's voice lingered from a memory. Claire, legacy is built on choices, not just names in a will. She looked up at the grey sky, then out across the quiet town and whispered under her breath, I got the house back, but I'm not sure what else I lost in the process. The Whitmore house was quiet again, the kind of quiet that settled not with tension, but with space. Space for something new to take root. Claire stepped through the front door alone, the creak of the hinges greeting her like an old friend. For the first time since the verdict, she was here not as a visitor, not as an outsider or a plaintiff, but as its rightful co-owner. The warmth of that truth lingered in her chest, strange and unfamiliar. Inside, the decor was a jarring blend of past and present. Brielle's modern, soulless renovations clashed with remnants of what once was. Her grandfather's coat still hung by the mudroom. The faint smell of pine from the original wood paneling lingered in corners untouched by fresh paint. Claire moved slowly from room to room, taking it all in. In the sunroom, she ran her fingers across the window frame where her grandfather used to sit, tying nautical knots to teach her patience. She closed her eyes and saw herself again, maybe 10 or 11, sitting on the rug nearby with a workbook on her lap, listening to Brielle giggling outside as Evelyn pushed her on the swing, telling Claire to finish her homework first. Claire stood in that room longer than she planned to. Then she walked upstairs, paused at the hallway landing, and looked out through the same window she had stared through as a teenager, wondering if anyone would ever see her beyond what she could accomplish. The house had always belonged to someone else. Her parents, her sister, the image of a perfect family. But now, it didn't just belong to her legally, it felt like hers in spirit. She sat down by the window, tucking her knees to her chest, and for the first time in years, let herself be still. It was late afternoon when the doorbell rang. Claire hesitated for a moment, then rose and walked to the door. Standing on the porch was Brielle, makeup-free, hair pulled into a messy bun, her face tired, raw. She wasn't dressed for performance this time. No filters, no angles. Just a woman clinging to the last shred of familiarity she had left. In her arms was a folder, dog-eared and stuffed with papers. Claire said nothing. She stepped aside. Brielle entered slowly, eyes darting across the house like she half expected to be scolded or thrown out. She glanced toward the dining room and winced when she noticed the photo of Edgar back on the wall. I didn't know where else to go, she said quietly. Claire folded her arms. What happened? My bank account's frozen, Brielle confessed. Mum stopped covering my rent. I lost my job last week, and my boyfriend, well, he was never really in it for the long haul. She tried to laugh. It broke halfway through. But I don't have anyone left, not even Mum's answering my calls. I thought maybe you could help, just until I get back on my feet. Claire didn't reply right away. She walked into the kitchen, poured herself a cup of coffee, and returned to the living room. She sat down, sipped, watched Brielle with a gaze that was no longer clouded by hurt, but clarity. You know what the worst part is? Claire said softly. It's not that you betrayed me. It's that deep down you assumed I'd still be here, waiting to clean up the mess. Brielle's eyes brimmed with tears. I didn't mean to hurt you, I didn't think you'd ever fight back. That's the problem, Claire said. None of you ever thought I would. She leaned back, her voice calm and final. I'm not here to fix this for you, not anymore. You want to rebuild your life? Do it the way I did, alone, from scratch. Brielle opened her mouth, then closed it. Her shoulders sagged. For once, she had nothing to say. She nodded, eyes dropping to the floor, and quietly left without asking for anything more. Claire stood at the door and watched her sister walk down the steps, disappearing into the grey haze of dusk. There was no triumph in that moment, only release. Later that evening, Claire returned to her room and pulled out the leather journal she had reopened weeks ago. She flipped past the entries from the court days and the nights filled with anger. Then she turned to a fresh page. At the top, she wrote, Things I've never done for myself. Travel to Greece. Open a business. Redecorate this house for me. She tapped her pen against the edge of the page for a moment, then stood up. Walking to the hallway, she reached for a canvas print of Brielle's from the last remodel, a garish gold and grey abstract piece. She took it down and leaned it against the wall. In its place, she carefully hung a black and white photograph of Edgar Whitmore standing by the original porch railing, his face calm, proud. As she stepped back to admire it, the house seemed to breathe with her. Finally, quietly, hers. The front lawn of the Whitmore house no longer resembled the pristine, impersonal display it had become under Brielle's makeover. The gravel paths had been softened with native wildflowers. The porch swing had returned, painted a soft robin's egg blue. A new sign hung proudly at the white iron gate. The New Dawn Initiative, empowering women to reclaim their future. Claire stood in the front doorway, clipboard in hand, watching as a small group of young women filtered through the gates. They carried notebooks, laptops, nervous excitement. Some were students from the local university, others were early-stage entrepreneurs, all of them drawn here by word of mouth, curiosity, or maybe something more personal, a hunger to be heard, to be seen, to be taken seriously. Inside, the once stuffy parlor now held long tables, freshly brewed coffee, and a whiteboard filled with the day's agenda. Claire wore a soft navy dress, her heels traded for comfortable flats. Her presence no longer felt like armor. It felt like foundation. She greeted each guest with a firm handshake, warm eye contact. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the need to prove herself. She was already here, fully. The first session began in what used to be the formal dining room. Claire stood before the young women and introduced herself, not with a resume, but with a story. I spent most of my life believing that being responsible, being quiet, meant being good, she began. I thought if I worked hard enough, stayed out of the way, I'd eventually earn the love, the recognition, the fairness I deserved. But that's not how life works, especially not for women like us. She paused, letting her words settle. I was erased, overlooked, and when I finally spoke up, I was told I was the problem. But here's the truth, your voice is your power. If no one offers you a seat at the table, build your own damn table. That's what this house is now, a table, for all of us. Applause filled the room, not loud, but solid, sincere. Throughout the day, she watched those women come alive. Ideas spilled across notepads, partnerships began at coffee breaks. One young woman stayed behind after the final session, her hands trembling as she asked if Claire would look at her business plan. Claire smiled and nodded. That's exactly what I'm here for. That night, after the last guest left, Claire walked the house alone, turning off lights room by room. The energy lingered, youthful, hungry, full of promise. She passed the portrait of Edgar Whitmore, now hanging at the top of the staircase where it had always belonged. She paused, nodded slightly. "You'd have liked this," she murmured. The next morning arrived, wrapped in mist and soft light. Claire sat on the porch with a mug of coffee in hand, wrapped in a shawl against the coastal chill. The sun peeked over the trees, casting long golden rays across the dew-covered grass. The silence was peaceful, not empty, not haunted, just still. A sound interrupted the moment. Footsteps at the gate. A mail carrier waved, handing her an envelope. No return address, handwritten. Claire opened it slowly, her name written across the front in Brielle's unmistakable cursive. "Claire, I know I'm not owed anything. Not your help, not your time, especially not your forgiveness, but I wanted to thank you. Not for the house, or the history, or even the second chance, but for not giving up on me the easy way. I'm working now, actually working. My rent is paid. I even filed taxes for the first time without crying. It's small, but it's mine, and I did it myself. Thank you for walking away when I needed it most. Brielle." Claire folded the letter carefully, a soft smile tugging at her lips. She didn't cry. She didn't write back, but she didn't need to. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt, just acknowledged from a safe distance. At 10 sharp, the front gate creaked open again. A new wave of women entered, fresh faces, wide eyes, second chances. Claire stood, stretched, and walked to meet them. As they gathered under the white archway, the same one she'd once stood beneath as a girl, trying not to feel forgotten, she looked out over the house, now breathing with new purpose. The Whitmore house wasn't a battleground anymore. It was a beginning. And as the camera panned out across the lawn, morning light bathing the home in warmth, Claire's voice returned, soft but certain. Family isn't always where you're born. Sometimes it's where you're finally seen, finally heard, and finally chosen to stay. The screen faded to white. Sometimes the journey to reclaim what's rightfully yours isn't about winning. It's about remembering your worth, finding your voice, and choosing peace over resentment. Healing doesn't always come from justice served in court, but from the quiet decision to stop proving and start living. In the end, what we build from pain often becomes our greatest legacy. Thank you for watching this story. If it spoke to you, let us know in the comments. Your voice matters here. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next story that just might change the way you see everything.